Hello. I've just come across another case which is a very blunt and sobering reminder of the situation of justice in this country, or rather, lack of justice. Um, Although such cases deeply trouble and anger me, it's almost beyond the point of anger. I think, speaking for myself, I'm almost kind of muted to the realization that this is our system. And the particular case I'm going to refer to here is in Scotland. Scotland has a different legal system from England and Wales and Northern Ireland, but there is a collective, consistent situation in all four nations, which, in my opinion, must change. So I'm going to read out the case and then say a bit more about how I feel around this. I mean, it's a subject I've never been shy to talk about and to be clear about where I lie. So bear with me. The reports from, I believe it's from the Scotsman, and the accompanying photo, I'll warn you, is quite disturbing. I'll put a link to the article. Actually, I think it's a Scottish Herald, but anyway, Scots thug who battered teen in horror attack apologises to pal, then beats him up too. The reports by Alan McEwen. Daily Record, the Scottish Daily Record it's from. A serial thug who savagely battered a teenager in a crime which shocked Scotland has been jailed again for attacking the victim's friend after trying to say sorry, which I don't believe for a second. I don't believe that's sincere. Brian Ramsay, 28, floored pal moments after trying to pass on apologies for the brutal assault on Angus Gallagher, then 18, who suffered 13 skull fractures. After being told he should apologise to his victim face to face, vicious Ramsay laid out William Robertson with a punch, then stamped on his head. Ramsay, who has an appalling criminal record, was jailed for 8 months at Edinburgh Sheriff Court. But the brute is likely to be back on the street in no time, as he has already been on remand for 5 months. After the sheriff imposed the sentence, Ramsay gave a thumbs up behind his back to his partner, who is due to give birth to their child next week, as she sat in the public gallery. In 2015, we told how Ramsay, who was wearing an electronic tag, beat Good Samaritan Angus to a bloody pulp. So obviously the Daily Record's familiar with this character. Along with the skull injuries, Angus was left with 3 broken fingers, fractured ribs and a damaged eardrum. The kind-hearted teenager had found Ramsay lying in a garage forecourt in Gorebridge, Midlothian in October 2014 and helped him across the road. But Ramsay turned on him before dragging him to a nearby house where he beat him again. The record also revealed Ramsay was on a tagging order 4 months earlier when he attacked ailing granddad Ian Hutchison, but kept his liberty. On Monday, the court was told he assaulted William at about 2 a.m. on January the 27th this year in Gorebridge. Fiscal Deputy, guess that's Deputy Rosie Cook, said William was returning from a night out with another pal when the cab stopped at Swan Crescent. By chance, Ramsay was on the road in his vehicle. The court heard he approached William, a friend of Angus, to make an apology. Miss Cook says it appears the accused told him, "If you see Angus, tell him he's going to have to accept it." The complainer, William, told him, "Do it yourself." At this point, the complainer was fearful and exited the taxi. The court heard Ramsay punch him with a closed fist to his left eye, sending him staggering and falling to the ground. Miss Cook added, when he was on the ground, he felt a stamp on his head from the accused. Face bloody, William managed to get back in the taxi. His girlfriend took him to hospital later that day for treatment for bruising and swelling. Ross Gardner, defending Ramsay, said his client had approached the victim with the best intentions to offer an apology. That's odious. I mean, I know the defense lawyer is doing his job, but I don't believe that for a second. I just don't believe it. He said the apology was offered and not accepted. Ah, right, so that justifies it. With the benefit of hindsight, these type of best intentions are seldom successful at 2 a.m. Gardner said Ramsay had been on remand for exactly 5 months, the equivalent of a 10-month jail term. But that's meaningless because it's not a jail term. Ramsay, described as an inmate at Edinburgh Sutton prison, pleaded guilty to assaulting William to his injury before being sentenced to 8 months by Sheriff Donald Cork. It's likely Ramsay will be out to attend his child's birth and enjoy Christmas. In 2017, told how Ramsay went on a crime rampage just weeks after his early release from prison. Ramsay, who had been serving 39 months when he was let out barely halfway, almost immediately teamed up with fellow lags as part of an organised crime gang which terrorised Edinburgh and the Lothians. The professional mob specialised in break-ins and high-end car thefts. These cars, including a 45,000 BMW by four and a 36,000 Audi Q3 from one address, were then used as getaway vehicles for further burglaries. During one escape from police, Ramsay drove up to 50 miles per hour on the wrong side of the road and into the path of oncoming traffic in Edinburgh. The next day, Ramsay evaded police cars by mounting pavements and taking blind corners at speed while nearly crashing into a Police Scotland vehicle. Ramsay admitted 26 offences from two indictments, which included 72 charges. He was sent back to jail to complete 556 days, with a further 2 years added on. Um, there you have it. Clearly, this character is a thoroughly dangerous individual. Um, and what we see here is a situation where the legal system has failed the victims, and this evil creature has basically been allowed to continue terrorising Scottish society. And he has many equivalents in England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Brian Ramsay is a thoroughly dangerous individual. I mean, I can think of plenty of adjectives to say what I think of someone like this, but it's a waste of time because no adjectives are strong enough. I think what needs to happen in these sort of cases where a criminal has such an obvious record, where they reoffend time and time again, the notion of rehabilitation is almost a bad joke. If you look at the article, it's a very disturbing picture of the victim. I mean, we're not talking about a few cuts and scratches here. The poor lad's face is like, it's almost dehumanized the victim. And the thing is, we're not talking about someone with a bad temper who cannot kind of control his temper. We're talking about an organized criminal. I mean, personally, I would be pretty happy if this creature was left to rot inside, but that isn't going to happen. So we have to be realistic in what may be achievable. I'm going to do what I can. I don't know what capacity. I don't know whether it be petitions. I don't know whether it be at some point standing for Parliament. Something. But this is an issue I've felt strongly about for years, and this is just another confirmation. You know, a week from now I could find another case, and 2 weeks after that, somewhere else. It could be anywhere. It could be Cardiff, it could be Blackpool, it could be Basingstoke, it could be Derry, it could be anywhere in the United Kingdom. There's a few things to say about this. Clearly, the system is incompetent, and the notion of rehabilitation for such an offender is a joke because clearly it doesn't work. And this should be a reminder that some people simply cannot be rehabilitated, at least not for a very long time. I think Nigel Farage is one of the very few party leaders who has actually been blunt about this, whereby he said that before a violent offender is released, it needs to be absolutely clear that they are not a threat to the public. This was in the context of the London Bridge terrorist attack, the last one, where the early release of Usman Khan was the issue. But then it crosses over into violent crimes generally, not just terrorism, but these sort of violent assaults. Scotland is a country that has a real problem with this sort of wanton thuggery, a particular problem. I mean, yes, you do get it in England and Wales and Northern Ireland as well, but there's definitely a serious problem in Scotland, and it may be. I mean, the report doesn't mention anything about this guy having alcohol problems or anything like that. Although I know that's been a situation in other cases in Scotland, which demonstrates the need to tackle that problem. I think Scotland probably has improved, but the system is clearly still a failure because so long as someone like Brian Ramsay is on the streets, the Scottish public are at risk, and that applies to any such offender. Um, and I think it's this grey bureaucracy, this incompetent bureaucracy that is clearly at fault here. I mean, I could say weak judges. I do believe that we have a situation in this country today across the United Kingdom where judges who have the power to enact real sentences simply won't. And I think the reason for it is partly to reduce prison numbers, but that is an odious, well, it's a ridiculous reason not to enact justice. To say, oh, well, I better not jail this violent thug because we'll add to the prison numbers, because there'll be one more violent thug inside. But I think that justice has to be for justice sake. And I honestly think the prospect of building new prisons should be seriously explored. I really, really do. Of course, it will be costly, but will it be more costly than the cost of policing and victims of such people being released early? It's a perverse, disgusting, rotten situation that we have. I can't imagine what the victims of these sort of crimes go through in terms of certainly the physical pain and the health problems associated with such an attack, but also the anxiety and the mental anguish. The mental language side of it actually is something that's greatly underreported because that causes a huge amount of mental health problems for victims. I feel incredibly depressed about when I think of this because I think that, the other day I watched, and I'm going to round this up soon, I watched Let Him Have It. It's a drama starring Christopher Eccleston about the infamous Derek Bentley case. Now, that was a infamous miscarriage of justice whereby the offender was 19 years old at the time, but he had the mind of an 11-year-old. A police officer was killed in the warehouse raid in Croydon in 1952. But because he was 19 and his accomplice was 16, the accomplice committed the crime. It was Derek Bentley who was hanged, and there was a long running campaign to have him posthumously pardoned. In all likelihood, he had actually been calling on his accomplice to hand over the weapon. So that's an example of how the system in the past was flawed in the other direction. And if we go back to the further past where we had public hangings and so on, that was a brutal system and it didn't particularly stop crime. So we had that situation at that time. But I honestly believe in the last maybe 3 decades, roughly speaking, um, something very rotten has happened in this country. We've always had crime and we've always had violent crime. We've always had thugs. You can look at London's East End in the 1880s. You can look at any other slum of that time, and you get some pretty horrifying stories. So, violent criminality is nothing new, and wanton thuggery is nothing new. The difference is, wherever you think of the past and wherever you think of the death penalty, and I don't support the death penalty, but since the abolition of the death penalty, and I'm not saying this as a sort of call to bring it back, But it is irrefutable that this sort of situation has went on unabated, where you've had violent, destructive crimes, and the offenders are released early. They go on to commit more crimes. In the past, they would have committed the crimes, but they would have been punished. And judges in the past actually believed in justice. They believed in consequences. I believe, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a solicitor, I'm not in the legal system, but as a deeply concerned citizen, I think that it's hard to think of any other explanation than we have a different generation of judges. You know, when I hear judges say things like, "You're a violent man and I have no choice but to issue this sentence," but then they won't issue a real sentence. I mean, what this guy has been getting is scatterings of weak sentences. Someone at some point needs to say, clearly, this is a dangerous man before me. This is a dangerous, dangerous individual. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to put him away for 10 years. I honestly think 10 years at least would be about right for someone like this. I'd be fine with a heavier sentence, but realistically, 10 years. Um, and I'm almost beyond the point of trying to promote logic to those on the left who continuously harp on about rehabilitation, but cannot seem to grasp the idea that someone like this clearly can't be rehabilitated. So, you know, the likes of the Green Party, a good portion of Labour, the SNP, and the Liberal Democrats, they really seem to think that the answer lies in rehabilitation. And they can't seem to rationalise that someone like this simply cannot be rehabilitated. Now, within Labour, I think there are actually MPs and individuals who would share my sentiments. And there's millions of people across the country who do. But the fundamental problem is that the public are utterly powerless. The public are powerless. I mean, if there's a MP that we don't like, we have the power to vote them out. But weak judges, the truth is there's very, very little avenues the public can take, which means that these weak judges are putting the public at risk. So long as they are in their position and they're making these sort of decisions, it's putting the public at risk. Um, People might say I'm being too harsh on judges, and they might even say, "Oh, we only go by the guidelines we have." But the guidelines actually, the sort of maximum sentences available, are often a lot higher than sentences that are actually given. So I think that's an excuse. I don't believe that these judges are issuing the maximum sentences available, and if they are, they, as judges, should be calling for a more proportionate system. The Sentencing Council of England and Wales has a lot to answer for as well. I wrote to the Sentencing Council. I mailed them a while back to express my views on this, and apparently they've got, I believe it was 12 commissioners or 12 members. They have one representing victims' issues. I can't remember if it was 12 or 10, but one representing victims. So there's something fundamentally rotten in our criminal justice system whereby the focus is on the criminals and not the victims. And to those who say, "Oh, you just have to revenge," justice isn't revenge. Revenge would be, to be quite honest, the raw side of me would say this, someone like Brian Ramsay should be taken out and shot. I honestly think it would be no loss to society. I really, really do. But we are a civilized society and we can't do that. Can't have extrajudicial killings. So we have to rely on the justice system. And when the justice system is as weak as it is, we need to demand change. So I don't know what I can do as an individual, but if I do decide that I want some part of my life to focus on redressing this situation, sort of balancing it out, then I'll do that. And it'll have to be more than petitions, it'll have to be real concrete action. But I will say this, I believe in blunt talking. I don't believe in mincing my words on this issue. I believe this is black and white. I believe that in the end of the day, someone like Brian Ramsay should not be free. He simply should not be free to terrorize the public. The fact that he is getting out for Christmas is morally repulsive. And if in the stupidity the judges think that they're offering some sort of compassionate thing because his girlfriend's pregnant, what they're actually doing is enabling this criminal to be in a situation where he will very likely assault someone else. Just wait for the point where he murdered someone. And I would actually say, in some ways, the judges are more responsible because I believe a character like this is probably borderline evil. I really do. As for this apology, let me just address that briefly. I think it's totally meaningless. I think he was told to apologise and he kind of said, "Oh, I better do it for my conditions." I don't believe for a second that was sincere because someone making a sincere apology doesn't go on to then commit another violent assault in the same exact situation where he's supposedly making an apology. So I don't believe that for a second. I believe this is a criminal who will attack anyone who he thinks is on his wrong side. Now, that is an incredibly dangerous individual who belongs behind bars. And anyone who says otherwise, really, if the photo of the victim doesn't move you, okay, forget emotions, just think in practical terms. And is it practical? Practical. Forget right and wrong for a second. Is it practical to allow such a dangerous individual freedom? I don't believe it is. We're always going to have crime in society. We're always going to have violent people. Nation of 66 million people, there'll always be violent people out there, but we need to have a redress which understands basic right and wrong. And I don't think we have it. Because an 8-month sentence for a character like this and the scattering of weak sentences that he's received does not reflect the gravity of his crimes. It just doesn't. So I'll put a link to the report, but I'll warn you it's depressing, and I just hope I've given people something to think about. Maybe if you are of the views of the school of thought, oh, rehabilitation, 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 I can't force you to agree with me, but I would simply say look long and hard at this situation and ask yourselves, does rehabilitation for a character like this work? It doesn't. Just doesn't. Wake up and see the reality.